In the Nigerian football context, coach contracts are legally significant documents similar to player contracts outlining the terms of employment, including salary, bonuses, duties, and obligations. These contracts are often negotiated and drafted under the jurisdiction of the Nigerian Football Federation, which is the governing body for football in Nigeria. There has been a trend where coaches, fans, players have complained about salaries and bonuses being owed. The latest development emerged over the weekend after the passing of Nigeria's football great Christian Chukwu. A post on social media stated that the late legend was being owed salaries, but the NFF, the Nigeria Football Federation, said the outstanding salary owed to the former Eagles captain and coach has been paid. Mohammed Sanusi, the NFF General Secretary, in a statement said the Federation has no record of indebtedness to the legendary footballer who died on the 12th of April. Chukwu had a contract with the NFA as coach of the Super Eagles until September 2006 before he was suspended in June 2005 following the 1-0 draw versus Angola. He was owed backlog of salaries, allowances, and bonuses. The NFF never terminated his contract and no payoff, according to reports. Remember Betty Votes, who was sacked in 2008, and Gernot Rohr, who was fired in 2021. They went to FIFA, and Silvanus Okpala went to the Court of Arbitration for Sports, and all of them got paid by the NFF. In April 2024, Christian Chukwu was still demanding unpaid wages from the Nigeria Football Association, now NFF. Now the question is, what are the legal steps a manager, a player should follow in signing a contract, especially in Nigeria? Now we have Steve Nwabueze, partner, Perchstone and Graeys Limited. Thank you for joining us, Steve. Welcome to the show.
Very good afternoon, Doka. Good afternoon, Lagos. Thanks for having me on the show.
Thank you very much for joining. All right, go ahead. I mean, there are a lot of conversations surrounding how much players and coaches get to sign when it comes to contract. And there are reports that Nigerian coaches who sign contracts do not even sign a fixed contract. We just get to hear that they'll be taking charge of the Super Eagles for a specific amount of time, but nothing is being stated how much these coaches are getting. We only hear about bonuses. At the end of the day, we hear reports that they are being owed salaries. I mean, we would like to know what are the steps to follow for these coaches to have a proper contract signed so that if anything goes wrong, you know how to hold the NFF by their neck.
Thank you very much, Doka, for that question. The starting point is that a player or a manager or a coach who is being engaged by a member association such as the Nigerian Football Federation should first of all engage a lawyer who would walk you through the ropes of navigating or negotiating that particular contract. Now, what you see in football terms in Nigeria is a situation where, especially when the NFF is engaging an indigenous coach. So what usually happens is they just send a letter to the manager or to the coach informing him of his appointment. The granular details of that employment are usually conspicuously missed. You do not see the duration, which are express terms that must be included in an employment contract. You do not see the mode of termination. You do not see the remuneration. And that is where it gets messy for anybody who eventually finds themselves out of that particular role. Maybe the person gets sacked or relieved of his appointment. It becomes a problem to claim some of these compensations, some of this backlog of remuneration. Unfortunately, part of players, the RSTP, which is the overarching regulatory framework governing football from FIFA, which started in 2001, didn't make any particular protection or provision for the contractual protection of coaches until January 1st, 2021. So in a manner of speaking, it will be difficult for people like Christian Chukwu and some other coaches of the national team who were unable to claim their salaries to lodge a complaint until this present FIFA framework of 1st January 2021 came into effect. So that particular framework has now not only defined coaches, giving a definition of coaches, he has now gone ahead to provide the minimum contractual requirements to be met from an employment perspective when negotiating a contract between a coach and a member association or a coach and a football club. So, and that can be found in Annex 2 of the FIFA regulation on the status and transfer of players, which hitherto only protected football players. So until 1st January 2021, when this present regulation came into effect, there was no protection for coaches. What that meant was that coaches were now at liberty to either pursue legal redress before the various employment tribunals or courts in their country. Interestingly, Article 22 of the RSTP vests jurisdiction on the determination of employment-related disputes between coaches and member association, or between coaches and the football club on the employment courts. So the National Industrial Court, for example, in Nigeria, will be the court with jurisdiction to determine any grievance between, say, Christian Chukwu or any other affected indigenous coach who may be interested in claiming the backlog of remuneration being owed to such a person. So such persons can approach the National Industrial to obtain legal redress. The exception, the obvious exception, is cases of international dimension. Cases of international dimension would mandatorily have to be lodged with the FIFA Dispute Resolution Chamber. I heard when you mentioned the case of Betty Bobes. I heard when you mentioned the case of Genotrop. These people were able to get the backlog of their entitlements or their remuneration because they activated Article 22 of the FIFA regulation on the status and transfer of players, which vests jurisdiction on FIFA to determine employment-related disputes of international dimension. Christian Chukwu could not have done that. What Christian Chukwu could have done, or any other Nigerian indigenous coach would have done, was to approach the National Industrial Court. But interestingly, as I mentioned, because some of the granular details of these employment details or these employment ends are not captured in a document, it becomes difficult for anyone to claim redress from them.
Right, Steve.
It is no surprise that NFF, yes.
I was going to ask now, because yes, there's no contractual agreement between these bodies, but at what point does it get to? Because we hear that the likes of Silvanus Okpala went to the Court of Arbitration for Sports. There was also the case of Gernot Rohr, who hear that he also got his money paid to him. At what point do we get to that a coach would report this matter to CAS or even FIFA? Because if there's no contract, there's no evidence of what you signed. At what point does it get to that?
Okay, it gets to the point when, especially in situations where this particular coach, like in the case of Christian Chukwu, we had discussed has been able to perhaps get others around, not privy to the details of Christian Chukwu's contract with the NFF, but what I can confidently say is that there's a glaring lack of political will on the part of our indigenous coaches to fight for some of these things. I'll give you an instance. I represented a well-known NPFL coach a couple of years back, and he was being owed salaries amounting to about 8 more salaries by one NPFL club. And we were at the point where we are going to approach the National Industrial Court or even approach FIFA to get these payments. And then all of a sudden he told me that, no, I can't go ahead with this. And I was curious to know why. He said, because they will blacklist you from coaching in the NPFL. So it appears our football is being run like a cult. It beats one's imagination that in 2025, one will still be discussing issues such as this. So to answer your question, I think the starting point is for some of these indigenous coaches to form a trade union. A trade union would give them a better bargaining power, because what it simply means is that they can negotiate a collective bargaining agreement with the NFF or even with the NPFL or any of the regulators in our football industry in Nigeria, they'll be able to negotiate collective bargaining agreements and enforce them. Collective bargaining agreements are generally enforceable. They are recognized by the various industrial courts or industrial tribunals, where you can go and enforce some of the clauses, some of the terms of these collective bargaining agreements. So that is my advice there. So it is quite pathetic that they will not be able to, or they may not be able to claim some of these remuneration because there's no written contracts.